think I'm the only thing, oh, I'm shouting? I'm the only thing between you and the end of the day party, huh? So I will take the time. Well, how many of you upgraded their project to Angular 8? Ooh, a lot. How many of you running Angular Ivy in production? Almost nobody. I'm the only crazy guy here, huh? So today's talk is really not about what is Ivy. It's more about where we're going the day after Ivy is going to be released. I'm Eliran. I'm the founder of E-Square.io, an Angular consulting and training company. I'm seeing myself as an Angular activist. I'm a writer in Angular in Depth. I'm organizer of Angular App Meetup Group, which is one of the biggest Angular communities in the world, and also a co-organizer in Angular App annual conference in Tel Aviv. So after a long wait, Angular Ivy is now available in Angular 8. As an opt-in version. It's not 100% ready, but for most use cases, you can start using it. And this is a great opportunity for us, the early adopters, to start playing with it. I know Martina already gave the overview on Ivy today, so I won't going to repeat her. I'll do give a short reminder of what is Ivy and why it's important, so you will have context just in case. I don't know how many of you checked the Angular changelog lately, but last week, version 9.0.0 next 3 released with an important statement that Angular now compiles with Ivy by default. Amazing, no? It's really close to getting released. Just a short flashback. A short history for those who don't know, Ivy is actually the third compiler shipped by the core team. It started with version 2. We had the template compiler. Version 4, we had the view engine, and now we have Ivy. It's actually a rewrite and replacement for the view engine. But the most important thing, it's happening under the hood. And for most use cases, you as developer, it's going to be transparent to you. It's going to be 100% backward compatible. So there's a lot of selling points for Ivy. You can get faster builds, simple template debugging, improvement in type checking, but above all those is how this render is going to reduce the bundle size. The world is becoming more and more dependent on those devices we are all holding. It might sound insane, but 63% of all US online traffic comes from smartphones and tablets. By the end of this year, 80% of internet usage is expected to come from mobile devices. Crazy, right? Ivy is supposed to be much leaner than the view engine, and it cut the bundle size, so our mobile user experience is going to be much better. So now the motivation for Ivy is clear, but we're all curious about what's coming up next. And what I will try to do in the next 25 minutes I have is to change the way you think about Angular components implementation in the post-Ivy release days. Where we're starting, let's take the simple idea of having one component, in our case, a counter component. It has one input to set the initial value of the counter, and one output to notify that the counter has reset. This is, in a nutshell, what Angular is all about, right? We're creating components so we can use them as custom HTML selectors. Now, in order to use this, we will have to do this. Create NgModule, declare our counter component in it, also declare it in the export declaration array. Now, next, we have to bootstrap this module. Then we have to import the counter module in the main app module. And only then we can start using our custom selector, right? So I've been looking in the Angular docs and I found this. A component must belong to an NgModule. And the NgModule, for me, is much more than just a simple component, right? Modules have injectors, they have providers, DI, zones, much more than just a simple component. NgModules are kind of representing applications. And I've only wanted to render one component. My point is, applications are not components, right? Sometimes we just want to render one component without being tied to any application. What's really shiny about Ivy, it's finally gives us the ability to render a component in a matter of simple function, theta render component, okay? But there is a price. What's the price? As we said, NgModules defines more than just components. They define injectors, they define zones, directives, providers. If we will create our own standalone component without declaring it in a module, we will have to handle those things by ourselves. Want to see it in action? So I'm going to have 5 examples today. This is the first one, the standalone component. As you can see, we're going to use all those functions, and they're all decorated with the theta prefix, which means that those functions are still experimental, and maybe the core team don't want you to use them yet. In my mind, it's always translated to something like Eliran. Go use those functions, everything is good. Deploy your website with them to production. That's great. So, let's share screens. This is the counter component. Maybe I should. You can see, right? And this is the simple counter with the plus and reset, and everything works, right? Now, instead of just using the custom selector, on init function, I want to use the theta render component and call the counter component. Okay? It will work? No, it's not working. Why? Because we haven't declared any host. So render component asking us to also declare host. Let's say my host. And also adding my host here. I hope it's big enough. And now it works. You have the component render on the screen, right? It works, sort of. I'm clicking on the plus. You can't see it, but I really click. Nothing happens. Why is that? As I told you before, NgModules are also define zones, which cause automatic change detection. And because our standalone component not declared in any module right now, we don't have automatic change detection. How we can solve it? Ivy giving us a new function called theta detect changes, which is really reminding us the detect changes we had on the change detector F, but this is just a function you importing from Angular core, really simple. You have to use the this, and I'm going to add it not only to the plus, also to the reset. And now if we check, everything is work. Great, huh? Let's do something more interesting. I have here a storage service, okay, which can perform a saving of the counter in some fake URL. I'm not really going to send it to somewhere, just to execute the request, okay? So I'm using the HTTP client in the service. Now let's implement the save button, okay? So I'm going to my counter component, and I have here a bind to the save button, okay? On click, it's going to invoke the save function. Here I'm going to add a constructor to inject the storage service. It's challenging to live coding here. Save counter with this counter, and let's subscribe to it. And we're getting an error. The error is inject must be called from an injection context. And as we know, because our standalone component is not part of the module, we don't have injection context. Who has an injection context? The application who wraps it, right? So let's go back to where we're actually rendering this. And here we can create injector by another function by Angular called theta directive inject. That's funny, huh? Was just getting the injection token, okay? So I'm going to tell the directive inject to find the injector, okay? And now I can pass here the injector. And let's see. Now it works. We don't have the error. And if I'm click on the save, so it's invoking the fake URL, whatever. Let's see, xhr, and some fake URL got invoked. Great. First example behind us. Back to the slides. Second one, automatic change detection. And automatic change detection is really important part of our day-to-day with Angular applications. And I guess most of you using the async pipe. Who's not using the async pipe? Great, everybody using the async pipe. So let's have a look on our second example. I have here a simple component, which only needs, I'm using the HTTP client to get some post array from the net, from just a JSON placeholder. Now, we got back an observable of post array, right? And if I want to show it on the template, I'm using the async pipe. I'm not sure how many of you check the async pipe source code, but if you check, you will find out that the async pipe is actually relying on zones. It's using the mark4check function. And as you know, our standalone component don't have zones, right? If you don't believe me, we can wait. Back to the code. And here's the post, okay? If you just want to show that you don't have zones, you can just turn it off for the whole application for now, and you don't have anything, okay? How are we going to solve it? First, let's bring back zones, because we need it later. How are we going to solve it? We're going to use, we're probably going to have something like the push pipe. Manfred is here? Manfred? Yeah. I know Manfred created an optional implementation of it, so you can find it on his GitHub. And I also added to this repository. But in the future, we're going to have something like the push pipe that's going to help us doing this automatic change detection without zones. Where I am? Okay. Demo number 3, OnPush components. We want to still use OnPush optimization, right? And if we already mentioned mark4check function, let's see another example of how it's going to look like in the Ivy days. So we have two components, mark4check component, which is the container component, and it holds a behavior subject with the initial stream of numbers 1, 2, 3, okay? We also have child components that subscribe to data and getting the input, getting the data as an input, okay? Now, if we see that in the code, we can see it works, right? If I'm going to change it in the child component, if I will just change the strategy to change detection strategy on push, so it's not gonna work. How it's going to look like in the Ivy days, if until now we just use the mark4check function, now we have the theta mark dirty, which again, you don't need the I for it, you just import it from Angular core, and you have this function, you can use it. Let's see, and works. Great. Dynamic imports. Dynamic imports, another great way of thinking of those standalone components is the ability to load them dynamically, only on demand. Think about the use case where you have something like a small chat box in your website, which is part of all the pages in the website. But let's say that this checkbox being used by only 5% of the user, or even less than that. When something like that is part of your layout, it's probably going to end up in your main bundle, right? And you don't want to pay in bytes for a feature most of your users don't use, right? So Angular 8 introduced the lazy loading of modules using the ES6 import function. Why don't we try to do the same directly on components? And going back to code. So in the feature component, I'm going to add here just a button, load counter. And on click, I want to load the counter with a function. Here, I want to call the import function, navigate to the counter component. We know that we're going to get something which is the component, right? And here, what we're going to call? Which function? Render component, right? Render component with C counter component. Let's already declare the host, my host, and injector going to be this injector. Great. Now let's add the my host. And also, before we loading it, let's clear all the references of counter module and counter component from the app. So I'm going to go to the app module and clear that one. And also going to the first example we had and clear that one. And if we have a look on our JS files, when I'm going to load the counter, I'm just paying right now on the counter component, which is great, right? Now I'm not paying in my main bundle for components. I only need in some events, like click events or whatever. Cool. Last thing for today. No. We talked a lot here about the future of components, but if you ask me, one of the most exciting things we can do with Angular application in the post-Ivy days is the ability to create higher order components. And AJC is a function which gets a component and returns a component, but also affecting the component in between. And until now, we was tied to those factories, and we couldn't really do it. But now in Ivy, because now the ng component def is part of the instance we have, we can create an experimental AJC at least. And if you want to see a practical example, I'm going to create now an RxJS auto unsubscriber. How many of you really care about unsubscribing from subscriptions? Ooh, good for you, but all the rest, this is for you. So let's have a look at this example. We have a timer that ticks every 1 second, okay? This on init, it's starting to tick. And we're also adding a tab with a console log, okay? This console log is going to be the indicator that the subscription is still on, okay? Even if we're destroying the component without unsubscribing, we have this console log in the subscription. Great. We're also going to create a wrapper component with 2 buttons and the timer itself. One button is going to destroy the timer, and the other one going to revive it. Okay? Great. So let's refresh it, look at the console, and as we can see, the timer component is ticking, and also the console is ticking, right? I'm going to destroy my timer, and the console is still ticking, right? Makes sense. If I'm going to revive it, what's going to happen? I'm going to have 2 subscriptions, right? Let's destroy it again and revive it again. And this is how you're creating memory leaks in your applications. Who's doing that a lot? Over there. Yeah. So I'm going to create from scratch. It's going to be challenging, but let's create an AJOC which is going to do it. So I'm exporting a function which I'm going to call unsubscriber. Or no, unsubscriber is good enough. Which is going to get keys of type string array. Now, in the beginning, we're returning a function which getting the component type. Here, we're first going to save the original factory by taking it from the component type. It's sitting on the ngComponent def.factory. If I'm misspelling something, correct me. Now, we can override the factory on the component type to get a function who's getting the args, and inside of it, we actually can invoke we can create the component by invoking the original factory with the args. Here, we're just going to return the component, and here we're going to return the component type. Looks amazing, huh? Let's just console log the component here. Okay, and let's go to the timer component and add it as a decorator, unsubscriber, which for now will get an empty array. Okay? Yeah, I have to rebuild it. Let's wait. Somebody have a joke for me? No? Faster compilation, Ivy. Now, as you can see in the console, we got the timer component instance, right? With the counter and the counter subscription. Let's leverage the power of AJOC. This was just a basic AJOC. And now let's get into the NgOnDestroy hook. How are we going to do it? So I'm going to get back to the AJOC. And instead of just console log it, I'm going to do the next thing. I'm going to take the component type, the ngComponent def, okay? And here, I'm going to take the onDestroy hook. I'm going to override it into a function, which is going to check 2 things. First, I'm going to check on the component instance if I have something that's called ngOnDestroy. Why I have to check it? Because if the user already implemented the ngOnDestroy, I don't want to just override it, so I'm just going to invoke it. Okay? Now, I have these keys arrays, so let's take the keys, and I'm going to iterate over the keys, take each and every key, check if the component has this key. What I want to do? Unsubscribe. Unsubscribe. Yeah, looks good? Looks good? Great. Let's go back to the timer. And here, I'm just going to add the subscriptions that I have. Crossing fingers. I'm going to destroy it. Whew. Let's summarize what we just learned. Ivy, the third generation of Angular compilers, is almost here, and it brings a lot of cool and important new functionality for us as developers, like standalone components, dynamic loading of components, smarter change detection, and also HOCs. I haven't spoke about it today, but standalone components really sets the ground to Angular elements to be much popular in our day-to-day applications. Ivy is almost there, but let me encourage you to give it a try right now. I'll post all the slides on Twitter, on the repo also, so you can have this HOC, so you like it. If you're looking for a deep dive into Ivy, I also wrote a popular blog post on Angular in depth. All you need to know about Ivy, you can read that. Now, let's raise our hand and say bye-bye-bye to NgModules.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thank you very much for being here today.